continue without Facebook. Hey everybody, sorry for being a couple minutes late. We had some technical issues with Facebook, which we are not streaming to today. So hopefully everybody saw it on Facebook, and if they want to watch, they're watching us here. So Matthew posted this thing earlier this week where it came from Jeremy Enns' email, and the post got me thinking about just how much podcasting has changed in 2025. That's what we're here to talk about. There's so many changes that I haven't seen so many changes across the whole podcasting space in the 6 years I've been working as a podcast editor. So let me bring Matt in and we'll get started.
Hello, everyone. How's it going? Are we side by side, or am I just on my own? I can't tell. Sorry, you'll notice that I'm very slovenly today, everyone. I apologize. Having just done a bit of a rush of work before coming onto this stream, and then not making myself presentable. I feel like I'm a little bit behind, but Jesse was right on the money. Jeremy Enns is it's difficult to say exactly what he is. I'd call him a polymath of podcasting, I think would be the best way to describe it. He's a marketing expert by trade. I'd say he's a coach by design, but his insights on podcasting, especially through the Scrappy Podcasting newsletter, are incredibly detailed, very well thought out, action-oriented, and there's very little he leaves on the table for us to pay him to get, I guess, which he is very openly and transparently sharing the journey of, like him growing to have a smaller client base, asking for more money, realizing that he does a lot of work in the industry for himself that he enjoys, but that as humans, we only have so much time in our plates. And the last few emails in a sequence that he sent through were talking about his reflections on AI and changes in the podcasting industry of late as a result of that AI change and the impact to his workflow. They were actually massive, and I'll be letting Jesse lead the discussion on this one because there's a lot of places it could go. But suffice to say that if you haven't discovered Jeremy Enns yet, you should check him out. Scrappypodcasting.com, I think, redirects you, unless you go to the Podcast Marketing Academy, I think might be the name. Nonetheless, search out Jeremy Enns and you'll find all the content that he has, and subscribe to his newsletter, and that will feed some of the fuel that you'll be getting with us today. So Jesse, where would you like to start?
Let's start with the snippet that you had posted, just so people can read what he had said. And the short, just to summarize it, is he's found himself going back to working more hands-on with his content and going back into being a lot more involved in the entire process. And one of the quotes in here is, and this comes from Allison, a longtime reader of his, "I had been hiring a podcast editor." Sorry, I've got something stuck in the middle of the screen. "I'd been hiring a podcast editor for 2 years, but went back to editing my podcast myself this year. It has been slower, but very creatively fulfilling, and I've received much more unsolicited positive feedback from listeners about the recent episodes." And that's probably the biggest real change from the podcaster perspective that we've seen in 2025 is the AI tools have gotten so good, so powerful, that anybody can be a lot more involved in the production of their podcast, whereas before they would have no choice but to outsource the editing. And I've seen so many people over the years talk about how hesitant they are to hire an editor because the editor isn't going to understand their vision or what they want for their show. And a good editor is going to understand that. They're going to work with you. But there are so many not so good editors, inexperienced editors, who they don't understand how to work with the client to deliver their vision. So for a lot of these podcasters, it's easier to learn to script and start really going really hands-on with the production, making sure it's the way they want it. And if they still feel the need to send it out to an editor, if you've read this whole thing, it kind of talks about that. They've already done a lot of the heavy lifting, so the editor is really only coming in to clean things up and make it sound better. But this is one of the things I've been thinking about with my course is things have changed so much since I did that course. A big component of that is how to use RX to clean up audio. And who's using RX in 2025 to clean up audio? I know there are some people that do it. I haven't touched RX in the standalone editor, I think in 2 or 3 years now, because it's a time-consuming process. It can take some trial and error, and it's an offline process. A couple years ago, we started seeing a new batch of tools. Waves came out with their Clarity series, Supertone Clear, and then Ascentize DX Revive came out, and that was Supertone Clear was kind of the first one that could get me where I wanted to go really quickly. DX Revive, I don't have any, there's nothing it can't really do unless you're trying to tackle something really extreme. I just did a video about AirPods and somebody had asked me, or AirPods as a mic. Somebody asked if I'd cleaned it up with DX Revive. I hadn't. I'll be doing a video on that, but the short story is it can make a pretty decent improvement to something that sounds as bad as the AirPods. That's something RX, they've tried to do, but their, whatever they call it, their frequency restore, it's never worked the way I want it to work. And I know we're kind of getting off into the weeds a little bit, but that's how much things have changed. Because you don't need to know how to use RX. Everybody can clean up their audio to a degree. I'm not a big fan of Adobe's, whatever they call it, voice enhance. Descript has studio sound, but it's better than what we were getting before these tools existed for the people who are editing themselves. Because, let's be honest, you show any inexperienced audio person RX, they're going to go running for the hills. It does not have a good user interface. It is very convoluted to work with. It was designed by engineers for audio engineers. It wasn't built with user simplicity in mind. So all of that to say that that one element, cleaning up audio, has gotten so much easier. That was probably the biggest unique skill us editors had to offer. And now you can do a lot of that with just the push of a button. And before I just keep rambling, I'll turn it over to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, you're right on the money. The clip snippet of the email from Jeremy that you've shared on screen here, I shared to one of our many podcasting Facebook groups. The particular one that I shared it to was an editing one focused on editors and being able to, do their craft well and turn a business out of it and create and make some money, I guess, get some clients. And everything you just said about how the technological landscape has changed is a thing that every editor has had to have at the back of their mind the entire time, because it's what we offer as editors is something that anybody could do, given enough time and experience. And so the advent of tools that make our job easier as editors invariably also make the jobs of the people creating the content easier. And if they get more time back and it's closer to them to realize their creative vision, and instead of filling out a feedback sheet that goes back and forth between the editor and themselves, they can just do it. And maybe they sacrifice the 10% that iZotope offered us in the RX set of plugins, of 10% of quality, I should say. Then that's a trade-off that they're going to make. But the dirty secret is that anything that improves an editor's ability is going to improve the abilities of the content creator. And that's something that I think we've tried to keep to ourselves. I don't think many people openly in the editing circles or in podcasting professional groups talk about the things that they use. I don't think many people actually claim to use Adobe Enhance as a tool for them to clean up audio. But I'm happy to say for myself, whenever I've run into something that's a problem that I can't repair with anything else in my toolkit, Adobe Enhance has been the last port of call. And more often than not, it's given me something acceptable. It's an AI tool. Anybody can access it, provided they have the right access and the subscriptions. I'm not even sure if it's behind a paywall at the moment, but anyone can use that. And that gets you most of the way there for quality. And if the rest is just realizing your vision, it makes it super easy. So that clip indicating that the creators that Jeremy is working with find it easier to bring the creation back into themselves, to be able to even get positive feedback from their listeners about the change that they're seeing in the show from bringing it inwards. That's excellent. That says a lot about content creation and how far it's come and the availability of tools to create high quality products. But while you're waving that banner, there's a bunch of editors in the back that are quietly shuffling around and going, ooh, what do I do now? Like, what does this mean for podcast editing as a career, as the thing that's happened? And the post that I put up in that Facebook group, there was already someone who responded to it and said, well, I spent all this time learning RX11, and I've read this small snippet from you, and now I feel like I've made a bad choice. Back to the drawing board with what I do with my career. And with a few back and forths with this person in that comment thread, I tried to indicate that we kind of have to move on as editors from the tools that we have and the function they serve for us. If the landscape's changing, if podcasters are changing, then we need to change and grow with it. And that's something we've talked about on a bunch of live streams before. The idea that we have to move beyond the basic offering and start to explore the higher order aspects of podcasting as our service offering, whether it's strategy, consultation, analytics, support, training and teaching. That's where it can go. Or maybe you move laterally. Maybe instead of just podcasts, you look at audiobooks, content creation for YouTube, videos, I don't know, dynamic ad creation for Spotify or something. I don't even know. But moving laterally and moving around is kind of what you have to do when you reflect on the space like that. And whatever you do is never a complete waste of time, because you've learnt a bunch of skills that can help you grow your skills even further into another space. So while everything that we've both just talked about for probably the last 20 minutes feels like the death knell for the podcast editor, at least in the next couple of years, and we've said it a few times, there is room for the podcast editing production industry to grow into something else. And I think what Jeremy largely talks about is how the landscape changes for the creators. And maybe you've got a few thoughts from the emails that I forwarded you about that. But at least the context for editors, I think we have to be going into the future with change in mind, but knowing that we're growing. We're not just, leaving all our RX tools and stuff in one corner and then rushing off to do a completely different career.
Yeah, going back to that comment about, well, I just learned RX and I feel like I need to go back to the drawing board. Learning RX it's not so much about this learning how to use the tool. You learn a lot of things. You learn how to listen better, how to identify what needs to be fixed. So those skills that you learned in learning how to use RX can still be applied to the podcast editing. We're just using a different tool. We're probably using much easier tools. So I don't think anybody is ever in a worse place for having learned RX, because there are a bunch of tools in it that are still useful. I have not found anything that does what Mouth Declick does. And I think there's one other one I tend to use, which I'm drawing a blank on right now. Push comes to shove, voice to noise.
Great. Yeah.
And if you're in the RX platform, they've got the new dialogue isolate. Not sure how many instances you can run with that. It'll probably get better. But the main thing is these skills, it's not about how to use the software. It's about the skills you develop in learning how to use that tool. That's always going to apply. Since we seem to be a little focused on the podcast editing part of this right now, let's continue with that. And
sure.
Yeah, the editing is getting easier for the clients to be doing. So as editors, we need to be looking at what other things we can do to offer value. If our clients are doing more of the editing themselves using tools like Descript and Riverside, what can we offer that's going to be of value to people using those platforms? Off the top of my head, mixing. Those platforms do not offer the types of tools we have using DAWs to mix the audio well. It's kind of really generic presets that they'll get things sounding okay. It's going to sound better than they could probably do on their own, but you're not going to have the level of control you do in compression and EQ and being able to do the things that we can do in a DAW to make sure that when we apply the loudness normalization, it's going to sound as good as possible. So that's one area. Other areas we can offer value to our clients comes in the form of marketing and being able to help them improve their show, help them grow their audience. There's so many other kind of ancillary, I can't even say that word, it's too early in the morning.
Ancillary.
Yeah. Skills that they're always looking for. One of the most common questions I see is, how do I grow my podcast? How do I build my audience? I've been saying this for years. If you want to offer the most value to your client as a podcast editor, learn the basics of marketing at least, because that is something that pretty much every client can benefit from. That's going to help you stand out compared to some editor who's just gotten started and all they can do is edit the content. Do you have anything that you have seen that ways that editors can increase the value they offer to clients?
Definitely. The thing that I don't see a lot, would welcome seeing more of if they'd make it more transparent, or if there wasn't so much of an ick with self-promotion of their own stuff. If you're an editor and you haven't created a podcast yet, make your own podcast. I don't. I mean, I feel like I come from a place of privilege where I started creating podcasts before I started moving into the space where I was optimizing audio and then video for other people to have a podcast. But I think a lot of the time, people have been searching the internet for the top side hustle easy gigs of 2023 or whatever year it was big. And be a podcast VA was one of those. Get an orphonic description and get Descript. And then in 6 button clicks, you can sell episode edits to podcasters for $100 an episode. And that takes you 15 minutes of your time. Seems like a hack. And there's a lot of people out there that have gone beyond that and improved what they do for podcast editors and clients. Like, I'm by no means saying that that captures the entire podcast editing public. But the thing that I'm trying to put this in a way that really makes sense. The thing that I really want people to be able to do is reflect. And if you could hear my wife coming home as well, I do apologize for that too. End of school time. But if you have a podcast, you've tried to create one, you know the ins and outs of every aspect of trying to create a show. You know how hard it is firsthand to market your show, to find your listeners, to look and refresh the analytics dashboard every 30 seconds, waiting for more and more listeners to start dialing into your show. You deal with the second and third hand regret of a thing that you left in the show as an audio quality hitch that no one else noticed. And you start to realize your microphone isn't as good as it could be. You can improve it. And then that helps you recommend microphones for other people. You have a podcast for 6 months, a year. You see what the average baseline foundational growth or lack of growth that there is. And then you start to be able to see that in other people's shows and practice strategies for yourself that you recommend to other people. All of that is to say that if you're a podcast editor right now or a podcasting professional and offer services at the very foundational level, like we're talking about, and you don't have a podcast yet, get one. Like, just think about something that interests you, and you don't have to be fully invested and optimized in the way that you'd expect it to be every single time. Like, you're not trying to be Joe Rogan here. Just create a show for yourself so that you can go through that experience. Practice the things that you've been regurgitating from whatever course you went on to become a podcast editor. Start practicing them for yourself, and then you start moving into other spaces. When we tell you to move into strategy and consultation and mixing and mastering and into the details, we don't expect you to do that from non-experience. But we can't talk about podcasts being democratized, hate the word, but democratized and available and accessible and free, and have you be someone who contributes to the industry and not have one. It's never made sense to me. And it's also the easiest way for you to connect with other podcasters, start a network, connect with people with a similar, hobbies, similar interests to yourself that are podcasters. And then you start growing that network and your client base starts to improve simply by having a podcast or being a guest on other podcasts. It just makes sense to me. So my advice is, if you haven't started a podcast yet, and I realize I'm telling this to you, Jesse, in front of you, who actively doesn't have a podcast for good reason, I think. But if you haven't tried, give it a go. And if you want to grow into that space a little bit more, it will help you unveil the fog of war a little bit. You'll understand it in a different way than just empathetically through your client experiences. I think doing it for yourself, it's the best way to know.
Well, and I think that is a really good segue into one of the big debates of 2025, and that is, what exactly is a podcast? Because realistically, We could say what we're doing right here is a podcast, even if it's not on an RSS feed. But there are people out there who will say, it can't be a podcast because it's video. It can't be a podcast because it's not on an RSS feed. But is a podcast really defined by how it's delivered? I think in the eyes of most consumers, a podcast is kind of do it yourself. I mean, I know there's celebrity podcasts and a bunch of branded podcasts, but the general idea is it's not, it's self-produced content. It's real people talking. There's all kinds of different podcasts, different styles. YouTube really got involved in podcasting this year in various ways. They've been trying different things, but that's been kind of the big debate this year. And I've seen so many people who are always, video can't be a podcast. Podcast can only be audio. Well, video podcasting has been a thing for like 20 years, whether you want to accept that or not. Video has always been part of the podcasting space. But I think a lot of people fight against it because it involves more work. It reminds me of like when MTV hit and you had the song Video Killed the Radio Star. We're seeing the same thing happening now. Videos coming in, and a lot of the audio only people are afraid that video is going to kill the audio podcast. It's not going to. There are diehard fans of both styles. You're not going to, the audio only listeners aren't just going to instantly move over to video. If you're creating good content, they're going to stay with you. A lot of the audio only people, they're fans of audio only for all of the things that brings to the table. Video podcasting, similar, but it's different. It's going to have a different audience. So again, it goes back to what is a podcast? Because I saw somebody on some Facebook group just come out and say, YouTube is, if your show's on YouTube, it's not a podcast. Okay, so if I listen to Joe Rogan on a podcast player, it's a podcast. If I watch Joe Rogan on Spotify for podcasters, it's a podcast. But if I watch the same thing on YouTube, it's not a podcast. So I think people get too hung up on definitions and words, and there's a contingent of people who really are against change, or they are unwilling to accept change until it's gotten to a point where they have to change their mind. And up until 2025, there were so many people in the industry who were very vocal about video is not a podcast. And all of those people have pretty much changed their tune, but with a caveat. Video is only a podcast if it's delivered by an RSS feed. And I think that's a definition that only a few people relatively cling to. And those are people in the industry, and more likely people who make money from selling hosting services. I don't think many people out there watching stuff on YouTube or on Spotify, audio listeners, whoever, are going to really care how the content is delivered as long as they're able to find what they're looking for.
Yep. The zealots who want to stick to the lane and have it not change, there's a lot of reasons that they want to do that. And I think it became even more clear when, I can't remember the name of the network that put it together, but the 3-part series called What's a Podcast, outlining the history of podcasting up to a point and getting some views from specific network heads and, hosting company CEOs and other podcasters that have been in the space for a long time, a lot of people listened to that and thought, hang on, where do you get off defining podcasting for me? And yet, here these people are also defining podcasting for everyone else at the same time. And the way that I think about podcasting is always that it's a non-defined space. The more we try to put guardrails on it, the more exceptions we find to the rule. It can only be on RSS. But if it's video on RSS, it's still a podcast, even though it might not have an audio version. Okay, then it must be both. But it's audio first, except if it's on YouTube, and then it's video first. But is that still a podcast? If yes, then we have to think of other places that it goes. It becomes a really weird kind of mind map of interconnections and a flowchart of yes-no questions that invariably lead you to kind of go, well, where are we now? And since I was probably 19 years old, I discovered, quantum mechanics and the idea of wave theory in terms of observation and possibility, the double slit experiment for anyone who wants to look at it, where fired particles at two slits would perform differently if they were observed or unobserved. If you're not looking at something, there's only waves of possibility. And I think that's how podcasting has to be treated in a lot of places. If we're trying to approach it as a medium that's functional, that's flexible, that gives us, as podcasters or podcast industry professionals, the things we need to be able to reach different audiences, then we have to think of podcasts as being as flexible as they could possibly be. They may be audio and video, but we can't have our cake and eat it too if we're out there telling people what it is, as well as poo-pooing other people for saying what it is when we disagree. Disagreeing is different to defining, I can't remember where you started with that prompt though. What is a podcast kind of led us down a merry path there, I think. You're muted at the moment. Still muted now, unfortunately.
Okay. My Stream Deck is acting up again. Am I muted?
No, I can hear you now.
Okay, because Stream Deck's showing I'm muted and
You just muted again. Uh-oh. In that case, I'll keep going. The whole idea of what a podcast is the super interesting part. I think people being afraid of definition, trying to put the thing that they understand a thing to be in a box so that it doesn't have to go any further than how they understand it to be, it goes completely against the growth mindset that we want to have for everything. I think editors get restricted when they deliver a service that is defined by what a podcast is and what they deliver on. If that offering doesn't grow, the podcast industry changes, they'll become slowly more and more irrelevant until they just can't offer anything anymore and the work dries up. That growth is necessary. And I think part of the reason that we're here today talking about this, the industry has changed so fast this year compared to other years that we need to be in that space of change, no matter how uncomfortable or difficult it is to do. I say it's difficult and uncomfortable, but the great thing is that you can keep learning stuff. Learning should be a lifelong activity, and you've never learned enough about podcasting. Even for myself, I started rethinking podcasting, I can't even remember now, maybe 2 months ago. A couple of days ago, end of last week, I used to have a podcast called Dead Drop Game News, which was semi-daily episodes where I just read off a bunch of news stories. And I've tried to iterate on that every so often to try and make it interesting for me again. Because every day recording news stories that I read and then regurgitate for people to listen to, functionally, it's great for people who are subscribed. And it did okay. But for me, it wasn't giving me what I needed creatively to make it work. So with a bit of inspiration from Mason Amadeus that I interviewed on Rethinking Podcasting and a few other people in his circle, I re-explored that, rebranded it, and over the weekend turned it into a cyberpunk dystopian radio feed that hijacks someone's RSS feed and gives them game news that will have an entire world attached to it. And it's all going to be elaborately sound designed to be like an ARG kind of experience, an alternate game with red herrings and info that you can explore and will slowly get unpacked over time. And I think that's what I've been waiting for. And it's taken 3 or 4 years to get there. But I wouldn't have got there if all that I wanted to do was give people game news. And I understand that a podcast is someone talking about stuff on audio in as high a quality as possible. It wouldn't have gotten there. So if you want to check that out, Signal Override Video Game Intel Briefings, I think is what I called it. Something really hard. Like when we dance in this world of SEO optimization versus creative control, it's tough to walk that line. But signaloverride.net, I think, is the website that I put in place for that. But yeah, that's the flexibility, the growth mindset, and learning forever in podcasting. I cannot recommend it enough.
And that's the big thing is we've got a bunch of people who think that a podcast is somebody talking into a mic. And I think that that's the general consensus of how people look at podcasting. Somebody talking into a mic about whatever versus other things you might see on YouTube, which is family videos or something you shoot out on the street. But talking about what you were saying about editing, there's so many people who are so against video that they refuse to learn how to edit video. So now that YouTube and video has become so popular,
Prolific.
I think it's prolific. So many people are looking for it these days that a lot of editors are scrambling to try to figure out, now we have to learn video editing. I think so many of us editors got kind of complacent about being at the front of the podcasting space because we've been doing audio editing, we've been doing all of that for years. And then all of a sudden, video comes in. Now we have to upskill. Now we have to learn something brand new. And I think there's a contingent of podcast editors who kind of backed into editing because they edited their own show at a time when we didn't have Fiverr and Upwork. There were a lot fewer editors and it required a little more skill. They started getting clients because they came to them saying, hey, how do you edit your podcast? I need help. So they became a podcast editor because they were editing their own podcast. There wasn't that learning curve as a professional editor because they'd already built that up. Now with video, we're having to learn new skills. We're having to learn not just video editing, but figuring out what types of things work. And I think one of the biggest things audio editors struggle with is just accepting that video cannot be edited as tightly as we can with audio. And a lot of people are looking for ways to be able to do that. Well, how do I hide jump cuts? Well, if you've got a typical person who ums every 3 words, that's going to be difficult to mask because you can't keep changing camera angles. That's going to become distracting. You can't use B-roll because that's time consuming. We just have to upskill. And I see that we've got Stephanie here, and she's got a question or a comment. The message has always been far more important than the medium. And I completely agree with that. The medium, to me, has been irrelevant because even though I never really got into podcasting, I'd been listening to stuff that would be considered a podcast long before podcasting was even termed. Because back before podcasting, you had people doing a lot of essentially podcasting, for lack of a better word, before the RSS feed. You had people doing like DJ sets where you would find new music. People just kind of back in the days of LiveJournal, they would do audio recordings of what they're feeling. They'd put them on their websites. Finding this stuff, you basically had to have somebody recommend it to you. You saw someone mention it somewhere because otherwise you couldn't find anything. You didn't have the RSS feed. But that content is still the heart and soul of what makes a podcast a podcast. Then you've seen kind of to the point you were making, Matt, about how if we look at it as one specific thing, that we're going to fail to grow into new ways. We would never have seen narrative podcasting if radio people didn't look into podcasting and go, oh, there's another route for us to go other than just radio to tell these types of stories. And with video, now there's new ways we can do things. What are these new ways? I know 20,000 Hertz was posted a while ago that he was having to move to video because audio, I think it was something like the cost of doing the audio was becoming, I'm not going to try to remember, but he felt there was a reason he had to move into video. And I think it was to get more, to help cover the costs of production of his shows. But he didn't want to just make a video version of 20,000 Hertz. He wanted it to be something that was done video first. And I know he's done it and has made that transition really well. And that's what we need to be thinking about there are new ways of doing things. Video opens up new opportunities. And like what you were talking about with your game one, being able to turn it into a multimedia thing where you've got a website involved. And there's so many boundaries we can push because every year something new opens up.
Yep. And the message, like as soon as Steph wrote that comment, it resonated really strongly. Something that I've started to do in some places is pitch podcast ideas as thought experiments that run entirely contrary to the point that someone is making. And I actually had this idea the other day that I want to try and make a podcast about podcasting that just walks through the motions of having a podcast. So it's a conversation with no depth. It's a podcast with no message in it. Is that still a podcast? And is it still worth doing? And will people listen to it simply by virtue of it meeting all of those requirements that people talk about a podcast being? Like it will be on RSS and it will be an interview with two people talking about stuff. The interviewer will ask really engaging questions about nothing in this case, but the conversation will go forward and the quality will be excellent and it'll be just the right length and it'll release in just the right frequency. And yet there'll be no message there. The content has always been the most important. Yeah. End of thought.
And let's keep talking about this. And kind of along the lines of what is or is not a podcast. AI is getting to the point where people are starting to use AI to create podcasts. I think that's missing the point if it's something you're trying to put out there to the public. But here's where things get kind of interesting in my head. Kind of like with your game channel. If you can use AI to like curate the newsletters you get each day to find the most interesting stuff and turn that into audio that you can listen as you drive to the grocery store, drive into work, as you do your dishes. So instead of reading it, you have an AI voicing it to you. Is that a podcast? I think that we're going to start seeing a blurring of lines where we can create custom podcasts for ourselves, especially as the AI voices get better, that are going to, for those people who have become very, very set on audio only type podcasts because that's what you enjoy. What if you can turn your daily emails that you check into a custom podcast? So instead of reading it, you get to consume it in the way that you want. Maybe you're someone who does better learning through audio. That's going to give you options to create podcasts around a subject that you're learning. There's so many ways that AI can be used to create more or less a custom podcast. And I've seen a lot of people talking about this and calling it a podcast, even though I know the diehards would just recoil at the thought of AI being used to create some kind of content that is meant just for one person and is not on an RSS feed.
I really like that idea, though, because there's an end state for every content medium for AI in that sense. Like, let's say that you're driving to work and you tell an AI-based platform, I'd like to listen to a man and a woman talk about self-improvement in the podcasting space for industry professionals as it stands in 2026, with a focus on monetization and dynamic ad delivery. And your AI will scour the internet for information, generate a podcast with two voices talking to each other for 45 minutes. The same could happen with television. And I think the AI models there are getting closer and closer to reality, to a point where you could, like, the future of Netflix could not be having a bunch of TV shows to choose from, but for you to sit down on the couch and go, I'd like to watch a show that's kind of like The Office, but all the genders are switched, the names are different, and instead of working in a paper sales company, they work in an engineering firm for a metallurgical mining company in Africa. But they all speak in English, and it just generates a series of 10 episodes, 22 minutes long, with ad breaks for you to watch, and it just generates the content for you. I don't think it's out of the realms of possibility for something like that to happen. And then I think the idea of what television is will become an existential question. The main difference between those two things, though, is that television is necessarily, and movies, are a gate-kept form of production. Because while anybody can create content, episodic content, with a premise and a bunch of actors in it, not all of it makes it to your television, because it needs to be published on a publishing platform that approves the content and is giving it a budget, and someone gets an amount of money and approves certain things or whatever. Peacock, CNBC, Paramount Plus, whatever. Podcasting isn't like that. It's not gate kept in the same way. And so we necessarily have to think like the production of that means that it can be available at any point. Like that, what you described isn't something that we can't do today. Like we can do it. Notebook LM exists for this reason. Give it a bunch of research papers and it can give you a summary of it in 40 minutes in an engaging discussion with a couple of AI voices. Whenever people try to put lines down for something, I think it's really important for us to remember that creating definitions before we move on to doing the thing necessarily wastes time. And I think in corporate, you experience that. If you've ever been in a company that's starting a big project, the first 3-hour meeting that you have is a meeting about how the meetings will happen to talk about starting the project and the people involved in the project and allocating the budget for the project, figuring out the scope of the project. And then it comes time to actually do it. And it's only 3 months on that you're starting to actually talk about doing the thing. You've reached out to the consultants to give you information and figure out exactly what you need. You've done the cultural work within the organization to figure out what the needs analysis is for everyone there. Now you're ready to create the thing, but you've done all this stuff before it gets there. Whereas podcasting, I can have an idea on a Friday, action that idea, have an episode within 3 hours, release it, and it's out there to the world. Is it a podcast? I don't know, but I made the thing. You know, it's, I think for too long, having a word for a thing is maybe the thing holding us back, which is a very existential, philosophical question, more so than one grounded in reality. But that's the changing landscape that we're trying to talk about today. So I don't know. Do you like to get philosophical?
I do. And it's too early in the morning over here to try to even get philosophical. So I let you be the philosopher on this thing. Whether it's a podcast, a live stream, whatever you people out there want to call it. But you brought up a couple of good points. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is the fear people have about change. And I think part of that when it comes to podcasting is so many people felt like they were part of something small and unique when podcasting was a smaller thing. Over the last 5-6 years, podcasting has become a mainstream thing, which means you have a lot of people jumping into it, a lot of people trying to, hey, I want to create a podcast so I can make money and retire, quit my job. Well, that's not going to happen for most people. But when you have advertisers throwing money in, you're going to get the attention of everybody. And that means we get a lot of low quality content of people hoping to find the next make it rich quick thing. Podcasting is not that unless you're already a celebrity. But you also see companies getting involved, putting out content. And then you're seeing more and more companies put their podcasts behind paywalls. Just like you see a lot of news outlets putting their articles behind paywalls. So now you're starting to see kind of a commercialization of podcasts by companies. And I'm not a big fan of putting podcasts behind paywalls because that goes so against the philosophy of podcasting. But the more we see people do it, it's kind of like when Adobe went to subscription only. They were the first one to do that, but now you see other companies trying to figure out how they can do that. And that's my fear with podcasting is you start seeing one company put their stuff behind a paywall, then another, then all of a sudden all of this really great content that was being put out there is now being gatekept because they want to monetize it. At which point, I don't think it's really a podcast.
And here we are at late stage capitalism and the enshittification of the internet.
Yep.
It's so interesting that you brought that up, that's part of the changing landscape of podcasting. That, I mean, it's not just podcasting, right? It's the entire world. That if we're in a world where things aren't as abundant as they used to be, economies are starting to pressure people to prevent them from creating the things that they want to make through patronage or whatever means that they would otherwise do it. The demands of paying and salaried jobs are becoming so full of responsibilities that there's no room for the person to have a side creative thing anymore. The movement of the podcasting industry into a monetized space is pressuring people who want to do it for the creativity out of the space because they presume it's not worth the time if they can't make the money. And that's, again, one of those toxically positive things that people have started talking about, which is great. Like being able to put ads on a podcast that hasn't reached 10,000 downloads per month yet. I think that's the number that people used to quote all the time. Yes, you definitely can. And there are people out here on the forums and stuff saying, I get 120 downloads a month and make, $600,000 a year. Brilliant. That's good for you. But if money becomes the goal, then you're going to squeeze people out who want to do creative things. And then what is a podcast? Like, it's not a scrappy upstart anymore. It's a corporatized, incentivized, creative output. And I think YouTube would be an interesting parallel to compare for that, because people talk about monetizing on YouTube as quickly as possible, but it's also a freely available platform that monetizes everything. But the platform uses your videos to monetize when you don't, so that they can continue offering you a service for free. But you can still realize your creative vision if you're happy for that to take place. And we're at not just a late stage capitalism, but a late stage individualization of ourselves as well. Our privacy has never been more important. Our independence from the system, the establishment, has been rocked by a pandemic. And now the economy is buckling because it can't sustain itself in a post-pandemic consequentialism that's bearing down on everyone. And the thing we're asking ourselves is, what is a podcast and what isn't? I don't know. It's a fully existential discussion that I'm having with myself here. I don't want anyone else to have that, because as soon as you bear the reality of the world in its very basic form, without any optimism or hope, it becomes really hard to have a discussion like that. And then the people who haven't looked at the world in its broader sense and are just inside podcasting, the discussion becomes easier and you can tell people what to do, but you've also ignored the world as it is. And I think that's the problem that a lot of people have in the podcasting space. When it's categorized and it's named the podcasting industry, we presume that everything that happens in that bubble necessarily isn't impacted by anything else. But of course it is. Amazon redistributes an entire arm that created podcasts within its company because presumably it wasn't delivering enough output. It wasn't giving enough money. Spotify leans into AI and starts generating products that it otherwise would have paid big podcasters to do for it. When we start locking down what a podcast is and we try to define it for other people and do it a priori, which in philosophical terms is doing it in absence of any other considerations, like first principles, decide what a podcast is without its impact on the rest of the world or the rest of the world's impact on it, we can't arrive in a place for growth and learning and continuing to evolve as a medium. It just can't happen. Capitalism be damned. And, industries and advertising and all that stuff be damned. It might not be a creative outlet for you, but it can be. I think it exists in such a duality of spaces that trying to define it and lock it down, it just becomes incredibly difficult. And then we get stuck on philosophical tangents where people who have an opinion about the rest of the world try to tell you what the broader considerations are for this little thing that you just want to have for yourself. That's just a nice thing, I don't even know. I feel like I'm talking myself in corners here, and then you have to turn me around to face the rest of the room and bring it all back down to earth again. I don't know. Maybe I'm too tired.
Maybe, or there's just a lot to consider. And I think the biggest thing is, as a creator, you need to always remember why you wanted to do this. If you're doing it just for the money, creating content is going to need to be a full-time job if you want to make any real money from it. Don't go into it to try to make easy money, because it's not easy money. There's going to be a lot of time and effort, the ability to understand your audience and the basics of marketing. There's a lot that goes into it. You see the content creators who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from their content. They've put a lot of time and effort into that. You may not see it. It may look like just whatever, but there's a lot of time and effort that goes into it. The bigger creators have full-time teams who are doing so much of the work behind the system. It's actually a business. It's not, Mr. Beast isn't just one person doing this. They've got a full team doing all of this stuff. So always remember why you wanted to get started with this. Never lose that motivation. Presumably, you start creating content because you have something to say. You have something you want to help people learn. You want to entertain. I don't think most people, no, I take that back. I see a lot of people ask, hey, I just started my podcast. How can I monetize it? So there's a lot of people who seem to be getting into it for the money and wanting to be able to make money right away. Until you have an audience, unless you have something in a very specific niche where you can find your own sponsors, you're making pennies. It's going to be a journey before you're making enough money to hire an editor. It's going to be even longer before you can quit your job. Because when you monetize through someone else, they're giving you just scraps from what they're making. And that's why I think there's such a fight for the podcast marketing purse strings. I think that's why you see the people involved with the podcast hosting companies saying video to be a podcast needs to be on an RSS feed. Because they can control the monetization. That's where they make their big bucks. The hosting companies aren't making their big bucks by selling you space on their servers. Most of them are making their money from selling ad space on your shows. And then they'll throw you a few cents. That's just the way it is. If you can go out and find your own sponsors, now you're cutting the middleman out. Now you're working directly with the advertiser, your sponsor, and that's where a lot of the content creators are making their real money. AdSense, whatever they get from their podcasts, that's supplemental, but the bulk of their income is coming from getting direct sponsorships. But to get those direct sponsorships, you basically have to create good content around a very specific audience that people watch or listen to. So goes back to having an understanding of marketing, who your target audience is. And that's going to help you. I'm not even sure how we ended up on this, and I think I've gotten way off on a tangent. So
Not at all.
save me.
I think it's interesting that like entrepreneurship is like that, right? When you start your own business and you're freelance, you have to be all these things for yourself. It's the same with your podcast. If you don't want to pay people to do it, you have to do it yourself. But if you can't do it yourself, you have to pay people to do it for you. And then you get stuck in a money loop where podcasting is still about the money, even though you're not talking about monetizing it. You have to create the content first. And then the stuff comes out when you go in forums to ask about advice for people starting out. Just get going. Just be consistent. Just do stuff. Just get it out there. And then the journey is never fast enough for the people who want to monetize because they do it for 10 episodes and then ask, how do I get ads on this? And then they start getting in that money loop. And can I pay for it? But I can't pay for it. It's a recursion that you see in podcasting all the time. And I think the big thing is doing it for yourself. Again, back to what I said towards the beginning, is that being a podcasting professional and having your own podcast exposes you to these components that people experience. And I think if you want to be a professional offering services in an environment where the landscape has changed and people can edit their own shows for themselves, if you want to offer them something different, you have to know where the gaps are for yourself. And the only way you're going to know that is if you create one. So whatever the podcasters are experiencing, you're experiencing it too. I think that it's the weirdest thing. And again, going back to a comparison I made earlier too, TV. There's producers, there's directors, there's gaffers, riggers. You know, you need so many people. Cameramen. You need health and safety. You need the food guy. You need trailers. There's so many different jobs that not one person could do on their own. In podcasting, it's not like that. It can be like that if the money's there, but it's different again. And I think that the great thing about podcasting is that it is in that space where it's always constantly growing and changing and adapting, but it's also adapting for each person who perceives it in whatever way they want to. And so I think the reason we're tangenting a lot is because we keep trying to define and redefine and explain and redefine and explain again a thing so people understand what we're really trying to say. And what we're trying to say is that you can't define it, that it's going to be whatever you think it is insofar as you're delivering a podcast, whatever you think it is insofar as you're a professional offering services to other people, or insofar as they ask for services from you. And for the listener, educated in
And it seems like we may have lost Matt. Matt, I'm not sure if you hear me, but you're frozen. So we will move on and we will save Matt. And we will see if he returns to us. But in the meantime, I did want to talk about content creation and how that has changed just over the course of this year, because AI has gotten involved. It's changed things not only in terms of editing, but in the way that it can help the way we approach the pre-production process. It can help us with the post-production, not just with editing, but in coming up with show notes and descriptions, title ideas. And that's one of the biggest things I see with AI is being an assistant, someone who can work with you on being able to come up with ideas, find ways of doing new things, ways of improving your show. Because, hold on, we've got Matthew. I got too close to the truth. Big podcasting puts thumb down on my feed, and he's apologizing. But what I was saying is with AI, we can do so much with it. Hold on. This is the joys of going live. If we were editing this, we'd be able to take all of this out as if nothing happened. But when we live life, or when we live and do things live, these are the things we have to deal with. And we'll see if Matt's able to join again. And if not, we'll just continue and we'll wrap this up in a few minutes. But with the content creation side of things, the pre-production, there's so much that can be done. AI helps us be able to research in ways we haven't been able to do before, or faster than we could before. If we're using AI, we can spend less time on the time-consuming things that are really low effort type things that just take up a lot of time. Research, finding the right guests, finding their contact info. All of this can be handled by AI. And it seems like we're having tech issues. Matt says, I think I've gotten link dead, can't join up again. Must be on my end. So we'll go ahead and thank you, Matt, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. If you are able to join before I wrap up, feel free to, but if not, thanks for sharing everything, and hopefully the industry doesn't find you and do something worse than cut your internet feed. But with the content, it's really about finding workflows that work for you. And there's so many tools. There's ways that we can make our pre-production more efficient. Like I said, research is a good one. And Matt says, thanks, Jesse, and thanks, everyone. I want to make sure that he gets his thanks out there. And I'm not sure why that's so tiny. There we go. So, Matt, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you for this idea. Let me get out of here and I'll wrap up. Live production at its best, and AI is not going to be able to replace that live thing. And I think there's going to be a huge emphasis on live video moving forward, as it's one of the things as of right now AI can't replicate. I'm sure they're working on it, but there's something to be said about that human interaction. And when we see real people in real time, we see them pausing as they think. We hear them stumble over their words or make mistakes. We resonate with that. Whereas with AI, it's just too perfect. Even when it tries to put in filler words, it still sounds kind of fake. It's getting better, but I apologize to anybody watching. I keep getting off on tangents because there's a lot here to try to wrap our heads around. The way that the industry's changed, the tools that are available to us, like we talked about at the very beginning. Things like Descript and Riverside, they make it easier for content creators to be more involved in the crafting of your content, the shaping of it. And those things have helped people feel more connected to the content that's being created because the creator has more control over it than if they were outsourcing it. Same thing with the front end of things. We can make things faster for ourselves. We can make it easier for ourselves. We can automate things on the back end. So once we have our content created, we can more easily repurpose it, whether you're using ChatGPT or a tool like CastMagic, or you're building your own automations. You can build things so that once you transcribe your episode or you get the transcription from wherever you edit, you can really easily repurpose that into your show notes, your title, into new blog articles for your website. There's so many things that can be done with that transcript. And I think that's one of the biggest things AI's helped with, is it's helped content creators be more efficient and be able to do more with the content that they create. It used to be that all you would do is you'd record your podcast and then you'd chop it up into clips and put those out to help promote it. Now there are so many other things you can do. You can use the same thing to help you write new social media posts. You can use it to help you put long form written content on your website. It's really kind of limited by your imagination and what you can ideate the uses for. So we had a comment from Pigtown Sports. I had to get back to my ethos, and I love it. The ethos is a really good mic if you're in a treated space. I really like it. It's probably out of all of the mics I've tried, it's been my favorite. I did find a mic in the closet that I got a while ago that I haven't tried out yet. So I'll have to put that into use for a little bit so I can get a feel for how that works. It's the Dockman Audio 87 SE or something like that. Maybe it's a D87 SE. But I mean, that's one of the things I've been finding for myself as a content creator is I've been testing different things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. I've been so in kind of over my head learning all of the AI stuff and working with Tara to get our new website up. We're undergoing a rebrand, so I've had to find different types of content to put out to be able to keep helping all of you, all of my audience members, all of the people that watch my content. That's why I've done more live streaming. You've probably seen fewer videos about different things. I did a bunch recently about loopback because I had a coaching client who needed some help with loopback, and I realized there wasn't much good content there. So I created a bunch. I'm starting to get more time to get back to the stuff that really seems to resonate with all of you. And that's the audio production, audio cleanup, and how to just create better sounding audio. Part of that's going to be more equipment reviews when the budget becomes available, or hey, if you make equipment the podcasters use and you want reviews, I'll do reviews for you. Just send me the equipment and let me do reviews without any input. I'm happy to help you. But yeah, I'm trying to find my way back to the stuff that I enjoy creating and my audience enjoys watching. So that's what it all comes down to. It's what Matt and I were talking about, remembering our why we started, and remembering that we create for our audience. We're not creating just for ourselves. If we are creating for ourselves, I think we're missing the point. But I think that's probably the best place to end this before I keep rambling, which I'm prone to do when it's 9:30 in the morning and I haven't had breakfast yet. So thank you, Matt, for everything today. Thank you to Pigtown Sports and Steph for your comments and for watching. And for anybody watching the replay and anybody else who watched without commenting, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.